Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments with chief focus on Lebanon, the Gaza Strip, Iran, Syria, Iraq, and much more, it's always important to remember how the war began. 425 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip have launched a surprise onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 250 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. And on this specifically, I'd like now to turn to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Mr. Marshall Billingsley, formerly the Assistant Secretary General of NATO, as well as an Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for countering terror financing, among a long list of other positions. It's always good to see you, Marshall. I'd like to immediately start. The pleasure is all ours. I'd like to start with a tweet or a truth tweet, whatever we call that, that was made by President-elect Donald Trump a couple of days ago, in which he stated as follows: "Everybody's talking about the hostages who are being held so violently, inhumanely, and against the will of the entire world in the Middle East, but it's all talk and no action. Please let this truth serve to the present that if the hostages are not released prior to January 20, 2025, the date that I proudly assume office as President of the United States, there will be all hell to pay in the Middle East." What are we to make out of those remarks, which were warmly welcomed yesterday during a cabinet meeting in one of the Israeli cities along the border in the north by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who stressed the deep appreciation of the people of Israel for the leadership showcased in this statement?
I think those words need to be taken very, very seriously. I think they were seriously intended. The president-elect has begun a number of actions in the remaining 6 weeks until he assumes office that are clearly designed to set the stage for a wide range of foreign policy priorities that he has. You've seen him begin doing this with Mexico, and with making clear to the new president of Mexico that if she does not resume the Remain in Mexico policy there, and if she does not clamp down on the illegal immigration into the United States from her border, from her side of the border, that there will be tariffs imposed and consequences to be had. The same goes for Canada, where Justin Trudeau received a very stern message. This is no less the case. In fact, probably one of the most seriously intentioned of his tweets. I believe President Trump does intend that there will be hell to pay for those who are behind the hostage kidnappings. If my friends at the Special Operations Command down in Tampa are wise, they've already been planning how to visit that type of hell upon the evil doers who are behind these hostage kidnappings. So hopefully the president will be, first of all, hopefully the hostages will be released before the president takes office. And if not, on the 20th, that he is presented with a suite of actionable options.
Thank you, Marshall. Let's now turn to elsewhere in Washington, D.C., where we're joined by retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. A long list of other positions, of course, as well. It's great to see you, General. One of those positions that you held in the past was heading the planning contingency at Central Command. What would such a remark from the president-elect bring to the table, basically in Tampa or elsewhere in Florida, for CENTCOM to prepare for such an action, and how would we interpret that from the region?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's important to note what Marshall said, which is this is probably, which I doubt, but if being planned, it would be done at Special Operations Command in Tampa and not Central Command, unless there was some sort of support operation enveloped as part of Special Operations Command's actual operation. I think this is one of those cases, with all due respect to the incoming president, you must take that old term. You can either take them literally or you can take them seriously. I'm not saying there won't be hell to pay, but I just don't think it will be day one. The practicalities of an incoming president sending actions and orders down to a military command, while the old president still has the ability, candidly, to reverse those orders, I think needs to be taken into account. So I'm not arguing the issue of can it happen, will it happen. I just want to make a clear point about when it would happen.
Indeed. Well, let's turn to elsewhere here in Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense. I'd love to hear your take on this. Of course, you're in uniform, so you're constrained by being right now on active duty. Nevertheless, within that context, the IDF continues to search for the hostages every second of every day.
Jonathan, you're right. This is exactly what the IDF is doing with all its capabilities. Unfortunately, the challenge is unique over the area there in the Gaza Strip. It is unique because of the infrastructure that we all know. Overall, we're talking about more. This is where we started, more than 500 kilometers of tunnels, and this is probably the most, I would say, the biggest bunker ever built in the history of the world. And the other thing which is super problematic is the vicinity of the hostages to those terrorists and the orders that we understand that are being given over there that if the terrorists would feel threatened, they might arm the hostages. So you take this unique situation and we found ourselves when we are. I think that in general, when you see such a strong support coming from the United States and from the elected president, this is always something that we super appreciate. We have to remember the cooperation that is being already done here in the area with the CENTCOM. Very tight cooperation. The relations with the CENTCOM are nothing less than amazing. We have this statement: partners in peace, brothers in war. This is how we feel. So I take it really as a support statement. When it comes to how to do it, time will tell. And I also hope that maybe just by the Hamas understanding that the United States is alongside with this, with Israel, and it's going to take all it means in order to help those hostages to come out. And they would like to make a deal, and it would happen even before President-elected Trump will be in the White House. That would be, I think, something that an outcome that everyone would like to see in Israel, the hostages back to their families.
Absolutely. General Kim, I know you wanted to respond to that. Just one point that I did want to raise prior to that is what does it actually mean in all practicality, since CENTCOM is already advising the IDF with all of the experience that it has in hostage rescue and different special operation challenges. Does this also mean practically boots on the ground in the Gaza Strip for U.S. forces?
Well, I think it means neither. The fact remains that, look, as an old British officer once told me, these types of operations are 97% intelligence driven and 3% operational. As Doron would say, there's been nothing but focus on where those hostages are rather than the planning of how to get them out. So if in fact the Biden administration is not providing intelligence that President Trump will be, I'd be awful surprised because if we're not providing the intelligence they would need to conduct that operation, then we really aren't brothers in war. So the only other assumption I could make is that it would not be an actual attack into the operational area to go get the hostages, but pressuring other countries, read Iran, that there will be, quote, hell to pay on Iran if they don't signal to Hamas to release those hostages.
Very interesting indeed. Marshall, you're shaking your head in acquiescence. I'd love to hear your remark on this. Since when we're talking about the whole regional scheme of things, Iran is a culprit behind all the various Shiite proxies operating against the United States directly, against U.S. interests in the region, as well as allies and partners, to include the State of Israel, of course.
Yes. I went back and looked at the president-elect's tweet, and I think it's important. I am sure that that tweet was discussed amongst his senior leadership, presumably with the National Security Advisor designate, Mike Waltz. And the hell to pay is in reference to in the Middle East. So the president is not necessarily talking about specific hostage rescue operations by one of the more specialized units within our Special Operations Command, though I do believe that there will be a reversal of the Biden administration's refusal to allow those units to operate alongside the IDF in Gaza. That said, I think what we are talking about here is probably a series of more calibrated and systematic actions across the region, directed both potentially at Iranian leadership, certainly the IRGC-QF, as well as its web of proxy structures, which, as you began the show pointing out when you referenced Syria, are now under significant strain.
Indeed. Well, let's focus on another theater, since we will get to Syria briefly. But Marshall, when we're talking particularly about the Ansar Allah Iranian proxy, namely the Houthi tribe in Yemen, in recent days they've launched multiple missiles towards both U.S. naval vessels, commercial vessels that are both operated and American flagged, as well as launching missiles and drones towards Israel, which I'd love to hear General Kavish speak to momentarily. But how do you see this, and what should the response to be beyond the don't that was so adequately repeated by President Biden in the past year or so?
I believe there were a series of Central Command strikes again last night, and I believe that 2 U.S. destroyers came under attack in the past several hours. So the Houthis remain a significant problem. But if I were to compare the infrastructure that they have, the organizational structure, and the capabilities that they have, they are a pale shadow to Hezbollah. They're even a pale shadow to the Iraqi Hajat that Iran operates for its own purposes. I believe that the Houthis are treading on, as I've said previously with you, they're treading on borrowed time, and that one of the first instructions that will be given to U.S. Central Command is likely a complete reversal in rules of engagement, so that we stop trying to engage the incoming missiles themselves, but we actually start not just engaging the archers, but destroying the leadership infrastructure that is making these decisions in Yemen.
Indeed. General Kavish, your take on the latest belligerence directed at Israel particularly?
Well, we have to look on all over the region. Unfortunately, we still see some projectiles coming from the Iranians' proxies. The ones that are more active than anyone else are the Houthis from Yemen, that in the last 10 days they shot 3 ballistic missiles, which were all intercepted. But we have to remember that when we're talking about a ballistic missile coming from Yemen, this is a very large missile with 500 kilos of explosive, and if it was not intercepted, the damage that it could make to a building or to whatever it would hit, it's significant one. So the Yemenis or the Houthis are still trying. They also shot a UAV that was intercepted by U.S. forces lately. So they are also there. And, if we're talking about strategies and what would be changed in this region, I think that the Houthis are one of the key points of what would be happening differently. because if the strategy would be changed, basically same as we did in Lebanon, if the strategy would be changed to what happened in Lebanon to Yemen and the Houthis, I think that we would be completely in a different position. But again, time will tell. It is quite amazing to see the global impact that we see with this behavior of the Houthis and, the strategy of the Iranians. They wanted to influence the region. Now they are influencing globally with the naval routes. We know what it is happening because of to the economy of the economy of Egypt and Saudi and even other countries in the Mediterranean. So for
Absolutely.
sure, this is one of the challenges that we would all have to deal with.
General Kimmett, your input on this?
I don't think I have anything further to say on that. I agree with Marshall that we need to start going against the archers and not just against the arrows. And I believe that, candidly, unless we put boots on the ground, which may be a Trump decision, we're not going to be able to get at those archers.
Indeed. Well, let's shift gears to Iraq, since the U.S. State Department announced that there were a couple of waivers on the procurement or Iraqi procurement of Iranian energy or electricity specifically. What can you tell us about that, and what is the sequence of thought leading to such a decision at such a critical time?
Well, if you're asking me that question, this is something that's been going on for quite some time. Every 90 days, there's a requirement to allow a waiver of the Iran Sanctions Act to allow back and forth between Iraq and Iran for distribution of electricity and oil products as well. I think the decision on the part of the administration is to continue these waivers or to cut these waivers. I don't know what the decision was made. I'm sorry, but one of the great concerns has always been that, in many ways, if you turn off the electricity that goes from Iran into Iraq, you're kind of turning off the lights. And I think the administration weighs one against the other, which is either seriously affecting a country who we are trying to maintain as an ally by turning off their lights, or if the money that's given from the Iraqis to the Iranians is so significant that the absence of that to the Iranians would have an effect on the sanctions process.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Billingsley, I'll draw from the analogy of the archer and the arrow. What about the rod and the fish? Why not just help the Iraqis establish alternative energy production capabilities that would then grant it more of sovereign independence from Iran, which is doing nothing but seek to diminish U.S. influence in Iraq as well as other places throughout the region?
Jonathan, we tried for 4 straight years in the Trump administration. I believe the Biden administration has also tried with little success with the Iraqis. In fact, 2 of my friends, I believe, are in Israel visiting today, Victoria Coates and Rob Greenway. They spent an enormous amount of time working with the Iraqis to make crystal clear that a net energy producer for the world, Iraq, should be electricity self-sufficient. They should not be flaring natural gas, and they should not be buying natural gas from the Iranians. Yet, even as of today, they continue to do so. They continue to be held hostage to both electrical and energy supplies from the mullahs in Tehran. So in the sense that General Kimmett mentions the waivers as being a necessary evil to avoid, the catastrophic situation of shutting down basically everything in Iraq from a turning off of the electrical grid, there is one key difference between the approach that we took in the Trump administration, that I took with the Central Bank of Iraq and with the Trade Bank of Iraq, which is the payment mechanism, versus what the Bidenists have done. And that simply is that I carried the message and the Iraqis abided by the terms that no payments would be made to Iran in hard currency. That means no dollars, no euros, no pounds sterling. The Biden administration reversed that policy and allowed euros and dollars to flow into the Iranian coffers, as opposed to the much harder to convert dinars or rials. That is a huge difference between the approach of the two administrations because it gives the Iranian regime easily convertible disposable income that it uses for its foreign operations.
Absolutely. Well, just for context for our viewers, Marshall Billingsley was in charge of the maximum pressure campaign, the economic pressure campaigns to draft all of the sanctions. So if anybody knows those sanctions through and through, it's him. General Gavish, I'd like to point out, and this is in context to both the situation in Yemen and Iraq. There seems to be some sort of collaboration between those two Iranian proxies, and the last announcement also highlights that by the spokesman of Ansar Allah, namely Yahya Saria, who stressed that both Hashd al-Shaabi and Ansar Allah have jointly attacked Israel. What can you tell us about that?
There is a cooperation, and but also sometimes each one of them is doing what he feels that serves his owner, which is the Iranians, and some of it are directed by the Iranians themselves. We have also those Iranian proxies in Syria that we have to remember that they're also part of it. I think that the main point is the real outcome of all of it, and we talked about it so many times, that everything is being orchestrated by the Iranians. And this is really what we need to solve. If we're talking about the major strategic challenge within the Mediterranean, this is Iran. And I think that this should be really our focus with the Houthis, with the others, we would manage. But the head of the snake, this is really where we should focus on.
Indeed. Well, Iran is currently focusing on Syria, where Turkish-backed forces, both the Free Syrian Army and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, are continuing to advance, gaining additional villages in the western and southwestern governorate of Aleppo. General Kimmett, we do not have very much time left for today's edition, but nonetheless, the Iranians have blamed the United States and Israel for being behind this Turkish-backed onslaught, while their proxies are seemingly trying to somehow stop the advance, not very successfully at this point in time. Nevertheless, with Russian air support and the Syrian army trying to bolster their various lines of defense, I'm asking myself whether or not they'll be able to once again redraw a line and then try and push yet again, particularly HTS or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham back into the governorate of Idlib.
Well, I think the lines are going to be redrawn, but not significantly. I think at this point, Damascus is just trying to get them out of Aleppo and try to get the M5 highway back open. Now, if that is the case, I think they will settle at that point and not try to push them all the way back to Idlib. But the wind seems to be taken out of the surprise attack of HTS in Jelani. I think now that Iran and Russia, who had their focus elsewhere, recognizes the peril to the Assad regime by allowing it to fall, has sort of refocused their energy, got the Russian airplanes back in the air, and I would suspect for too long we'll see the ground troops making a further push, perhaps not all the way to the Idlib line that was there before, but certainly one that will open up the M5 highway.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Billingsley, I'd like to hear your take on this, but if I could also hear your perspective. The U.S. Central Command has been launching a couple of attacks against various Iranian convoys and terror operators or proxies in the area of Al Bukamal. What are we to take out of it? Naturally, the statement focused on self-defense following repeated strikes against U.S. installations in the Al-Hasaka and other locations of Green Village and such in Syria. Are we expected to see some sort of confrontation potentially, as was seen during much of the Syria conflict before it semi-stabilized?
Well, there is a mechanism to deconflict between Central Command and the Russians, and my hope is that that is still somewhat available. The Russians, of course, experienced and found out the hard way with the Wagner mercenaries when they refused to cooperate and collaborate, and 300 dead Russian mercenaries were the result. I think you've correctly characterized the nature of the U.S. operations. Remember that Daesh is quite also active in this region. I also want to point out that HTS is a U.S. designated terror organization, and they operate alongside al-Nusra Front, which is one of al-Qaeda's most capable operating outfits. So we are in a situation where, to be very, very clear, while we may take some joy in watching the Soviets and the Nazis shred one another, the enemy of my enemy can still be my enemy.
Absolutely. Well, just to point out once more, Al-Julani, the head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is also the head of Jabhat al-Nusra, who in the past, when Adha Wahiri was the leader of Al-Qaeda, was his second in command, something that should be taken note of. Both are, of course, also, and this is very interesting, remnants of Islamic Jihad in Egypt. And that has to do also with connections to Iran. Of course, Adha Wahiri was much closer to the Iranians, and Al-Julani was much closer to Al-Qaeda and specifically bin Laden. But unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Kimmett, Mr. Billingsley, and General Gavish for all of your insights today. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
I'm Eran Etzion, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.
Israel has launched operations
on Vladimir Putin.
helping Iran develop. We have logic, we have rationale, we understand how the system operates.